And I'd like to introduce now our next speaker, Mike Rutherford from the Hunterian, University of Glasgow. He's going to talk about natural history repatriations.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody, and I'm very glad to be here. So my title seems to be a bit of a general broad one. That's because it's last-minute panic getting my title in for the sort of NatSCA abstract deadline. And I thought, right, this will do whatever I end up talking about. But what I'm talking about today is going to be a look at the repatriation case that I was involved in over the last few years. So I'm curator of zoology and anatomy for the Hunterian at University of Glasgow, and this is the specimen that I'm going to be talking about, a Jamaican giant galley-wasp. For those who don't know, galley-wasps are a group of lizards, quite skink-like. They're found in Central America and the Caribbean. This particular species, Celestis occidus, is the largest known species of galley-wasp and is endemic to Jamaica. It's quite likely extinct. There's been no verified records for quite a long time, but it's still hanging on, I think, on the IUCN Red List as critically endangered, but maybe that's a bit optimistic. So the story started in August 2021 when I was working just started at the Hunterian. I'd only been there a few months, and I was getting to know the collections and went through the spirit store, the wet store, and just happened to come across a specimen that happened to need a new seal on the jar. And so whilst doing that, I had a closer look, got it out. I think it's an interesting type of lizard. I hadn't seen one before. And it happened to be International Lizard Day, so I posted it on Twitter and stored it away for something to do with it in the future. And just had a wee look in our collection as well, our catalogue, to see more about it. Unfortunately, there wasn't really much information. We had catalogue card entry with the older name, Diploglossus occidus, and all it said there really is that it came from the Andersonian Museum, which was another collection in Glasgow that was donated to the university in 1888. And all it mentions on the card comes from the West Indies, and there were two of them. And you can just see at the bottom there, transfer to Birmingham City Museum. I'll go into that a bit later. The label itself for the specimen, very faded, but you can just make out that it said, I think, Diploglossus shawai, which is another older name for the species, and West Indies. So very little background detail. And unfortunately, the Andersonian records that came with the specimens to Glasgow, very sparse amount of information. The reptiles, as you can see here, the collection of lizard snakes is, and frogs, numerous. That's as much detail as we had. No who collected them, where they collected them from, when they came to Scotland. So a little bit frustrating, but that's what we're working with. Opportunity came up to use the specimen in our Curating Discomfort project. So this was later that year, and the subject specialist curators in the museum had been asked to provide a short list of interesting objects in their collections that then be passed on to a group of community curators who would then look through them and choose a smaller set to be put on display. I selected the galley-wasp because of an interesting background story, and it was selected. In fact, quite a few of the community curators expressed an interest, but a particular one, Chernjeet Man, she sort of ended up writing a label about it. And it was very much focused on how the galley-wasp was an example of an unfortunate, tragic story, generally driven to extinction by the sort of change of habitat caused by plantation culture, by colonialism in Jamaica, the introduction of rats and mongoose to the island as well, and the sort of typical tragic story that's played out in many small islands around the world and in many countries around the world as victims, unseen victims of colonialism. So it stayed there for a while, but I thought, is this just going to go back on the shelf again after the display finishes? And are there more of them around? It's quite an unusual specimen. So I started digging around in various online databases, GBIF, which we've all been hearing about earlier, NHM's data portal, iDigBio, and found quite a few specimens in various places. And then sort of digging to the history of the actual species, the reptile database being a particularly useful resource. Lots of good references all listed there. All the synonyms as well, which is very useful as well when you're trying to find traces of a species. And ended up with this list here, which showed, as far as I could find, where actual specimens were kept. And you can see here, it's Europe and America, where pretty much all the specimens are. We had three other nice ones in Scotland. So Scotland sort of had four specimens altogether. Type specimen, the holotypes down in London. and then various partial skeletons, whole specimens, and specimens in spirit in other collections throughout the US and Europe. So I thought, right, why are there none listed in Jamaica? Are there any in Jamaica? And none that I could find. And digging around the archives, we found that there were. There's a lovely article written by a museum curator for the Daily Gleaner, which was one of the popular Jamaican newspapers. This was back in 1896, and it's all about the lizards of Jamaica. And he lists the specimens that were in the collection, and lists ones of particular interest, and also puts out a call to the population to bring any other specimens along to the collection, either live or preserved in rum, if you happen to have any. And he mentions they had some Celestinosuchus, you see in the last section there. It was a fairly common one, but they appear to be rather rare now, none having been received at the museum for a considerable time. And that was in 1896, and saying, we're not seeing any more coming in. But what happened? Unfortunately, the 1907 Kingston earthquake, quite tragic, lots of loss of life, but also destroyed Date Tree Hall, which was where the Institute of Jamaica stored lots of their specimens. And this was particularly telling line. Roof of the building housing the museum collapsed, smashing jars containing specimens in fluid. So I think that's what happened to the ones they had in their collection. So it seemed a bit unfair. This was the very simple basis to all this. It's just not fair that Jamaica doesn't have an example of the giant Jamaican gallywasp. And it seemed a perfect candidate for repatriation. It was endemic, only found there, more than likely extinct, as I said. It has become a bit of a natural heritage icon due to its size. It was one that I found mentioned in various articles and so on, and no known specimens in Jamaica. So for all those reasons, I thought, right, should we send this back? So this really simple idea to begin with was just basically contact someone in Jamaica, say, do you want a lizard? Maybe send us a mongoose in return so we can tell the story of extinction. And that was it. So I discussed this possibility with my boss, Giovanni Vitelli, and she sort of gave the go-ahead. So I thought, I'll just reach out. And the first person I contacted, fortunately, because she turned out to be absolutely wonderful and dedicated and very key to the success of this project, was Dr. Shani Roper. She was museum curator for the University of the West Indies, based in Mona in Jamaica. And part of the reason I reached out to her was that I was also a museum curator for the University of the West Indies, but I was based in Trinidad. And so I knew her by reputation, but she and I didn't overlap. She sort of started her job after I'd left my one. But we also have a memorandum of understanding between UWE and the University of Glasgow. So it's just a way to kind of take advantage of that and build better connections between us. Shani was very excited with the first email, because she had previously worked in the Institute of Jamaica and was aware that they didn't have a big giant Jamaican gallywasp specimen. And it's something they'd actually talked about in the past, of being lacking in their collection. So she quickly got in touch with the directors, the zoology curator and the entomology curators at the Natural History Museum of Jamaica, so Tracy, Elizabeth and Dion, and also other members of the University of West Indies Department of Life Sciences. And we had many discussions on Zoom. And this project just started to grow arms and legs. What had initially sort of possibly just stick it in the post, there's your lizard, became something much more. And it was very much sort of bouncing ideas off each other as to how and what we wanted to achieve out of this. The Life Science Department, for example, were looking at, well, this is a great way to highlight the current extinction threat facing other species of gallywasp in Jamaica. Gallywasps have a hard time in Jamaica. They're not generally liked by the populace. There's lots of sort of mythology around them. People see them, they tend to kill them. And so he was very keen on going, well, if we can, revitalize this sort of story of gallywasps. So many discussions went on. And then suggested in January 2023, instead of just the lizard going to Jamaica, actually bring a group over from Jamaica to Glasgow to meet and collaborate and discuss and so on. Obviously, that's going to cost a bit more money. So sourcing funding became the next question. And in the meantime, there's a bit of time to sort of promote the project, get the discussion going. And so the first opportunity I had for that was I suggested a symposium at the Spinach 2023 meeting in San Francisco, titled Return of the Specimens, Repatriation of Natural History Objects. You can see I'm not very original in my titles. And we had quite a few other interested groups. So we ended up having 5 talks for that particular session. And it was a nice way to sort of be able to reach out and discuss the whole issue with other natural history curators. The next thing, this was very much led by Shani in Jamaica, was an online webinar where we had two speakers from the UK, Olivia Beavers from National Museum of Liverpool. She'd been working on another aspect of history of collecting in Jamaica. And we also had Elizabeth Morrison and Damien White from Jamaica to all give talks. So we all gave 10, 15-minute talks in this webinar, which was nicely attended and certainly got a lot of good comments going. People asking about why are you bringing back a gallywasp? We don't like them anyway. And so there's lots of interesting discussions starting. Eventually funding came through. So much thanks. This was all generally internal funding at the University of Glasgow. The International Partnership for Development Fund paid about a third. Glasgow Caribbean Centre for Development Research paid a section, and the Hunterian paid another part. And then the University of West Indies, they funded for a PhD student to join the trip as well. So very sort of co-funded. The things we had to do before handover, the first thing, which I slightly jumped the gun on this, but because it was us reaching out, asking if someone wants something, having to wait for the answer, it was sort of first time we'd done it, so it was hard to know quite how to go through it. But I should maybe have gotten full permission to get rid of a specimen before I actually really offered it. But anyway, once the ball was rolling, the Strategic Development Board were not going to say no. And so it was approved by the Hunterian leadership team, and then we didn't really have a form for doing this, for sort of giving an object away. So basically, I just sort of wrote a short brief detailing what the object was, why we think it should go back, where it's going to go, and what's going to happen next. And so that was approved by the Strategic Board as well. And ultimately, because we're a university, we just need approval of the university court to do these things. We're not restricted like national museums with various regulations and laws that stop you getting rid of your specimens. So we have it a little bit easier than others. Other stuff we had to do was looking at what permits were required. This again was a bit of a unknown. Main one obviously being CITES, but because the species had been declared extinct quite a while back, it never got listed on CITES. So good and bad thing, really. So we got permission from CITES. No, you don't need anything from us. But from the other side, from Jamaica side, they need an import permit. They're sort of asking for a customs and veterinary approval. And so this was their form that Shani and I sort of filled out for purposes of importing. But really, that was about it. Didn't have the same issues as our previous speaker talking about the kakapos. A lizard and spirit not got the same biocontrol issues as bird specimens. But if anyone else can think of any other paperwork we should have done, do let me know, because I am curious if I missed something. And then other thing we did before handover, this was very much again on the sort of the request of Life Science Department in Jamaica and Shani as well, would do some tissue extraction for DNA sampling. And that's something that's kind of ongoing. We've got a good sort of team at the University of Glasgow who do tissue processing. Because it's an old specimen, we're looking at over 170 years, stored in unknown media. So it was still working out exactly sort of how to extract stuff. We also did lots of photographs. We had a 3D scanning. We had various artistic projects all taking place before it went. And then the visit happened. So we got a group of 5 came over, Shani, Elizabeth, Dion, Tanis, who's a lecturer from UWI, and Desirina with the PhD student. And it coincided wonderfully with the From Scotland to the World Repatriation and Museums Conference. So Shani, Elizabeth, and Chernjit Man and myself presented about the gallywasp there. And then we had tours around the museum, introduced them to the curators, showed them our collections. Really helpful to sort of get them to look at our Jamaican specimens, our Caribbean specimens. And my colleague Jan here and I, so I had a lovely time. They could confirm place names that we were unsure about. They confirmed species names, said, well, that's probably that and not that. So lots of good collaboration just in a quick, short time. And then we had the handover. Lots of media presence and our director, Steph Sholton, and Shani were the ones signing the papers. And then really good coverage in the media. We had sort of well over 1 million sort of views of various media going out there. And even made the front page of the Scotsman, which I was particularly happy with, an actual old print. Lots of good coverage, and it was fascinating looking through at the comments connected with it as well, which went on both sides, negative and positive. And then the actual physical moving of the specimen after the handover was done, packed it up. We had to put the lizard itself wrapped in cotton rags, soaked in ethanol, no loose ethanol as it were, triple sealed in plastic bags, stuck in a little box. The glass jar went in a separate box, and this is basically hand carried by Shani herself through customs, with a letter from us as well for the pilot if needed, and the other legislation to add. She had one panicked moment when the specimen went through the X-ray machine, and she was standing at the other end waiting for it, and it disappeared. And it transpired one of the customs officers had gone off with it to show someone else because it was just such a weird thing to go through. And it's so once she sort of got her breath back, it's like all good, and then ended up back in Jamaica. That's it on the shelf there in the middle. At this point, it had been christened or sort of named Celeste. Celestis oculus being the species name, and being, as far as we could tell, a female lizard, so Celeste was the name that's used. And that's Elizabeth Morrison there, taking the lizard out of its container and putting it back in. It's not got on display yet, but they're intending to put it on display in the National Museum. But in the meantime, there has been a lot of interest. They've had school groups, they've had dignitaries, they've had MPs all coming to see it, and it's caused quite a stir. And are there no more McGarley wasps in Glasgow? Well, we actually still have a couple. I didn't know this when we offered that one to go, but we found out that thanks for Lucas Large, where's Lucas there? Thanks for his help in digging through what was given to Birmingham back in the 1950s. Birmingham didn't use these reptiles, so they kind of sent them back up to Glasgow, and the second galley wasp that was originally mentioned on that card was still there. So we're intending to put that back on display in Glasgow to kind of continue telling the story. And Shani, Elizabeth, I co-wrote a new label to kind of tell how it happened, and no, I next. And they also found a second one in our anatomy collection, which was there because of double tail. And yeah, they turn up everywhere. So now, now we have Kingston, Jamaica, one in spirit, one specimen there, and we've got two in spirit as well. So nice catch up. Ongoing tasks, analysing tissue samples, more talks, more projects. We've got a short film being finished off. And my boss is going to be talking about the repatriation, I think, in ICOM conference later this year. And Shani has been doing lots of other work as well. So lots still going on. It's been a lovely developing project. Just grew arms and legs, like I said. All sorts of things came out of it from just do you want a lizard back? So poke around in your collections, find something interesting and offer it. Okay, thank you very much. All right, a little bit over.